From the Edge Media Studios in downtown Indianapolis, this is Indiana Issues. Here's your host, Abdul-Hakim Shabazz.
Hello, and welcome back to Indiana Issues, the public affairs program where we try to go beyond the headlines and sound bites and find out what's going on here in the state of Indiana. I'm your host, Abdul-Hakim Shabazz, the editor and publisher of IndyPolitics.org. Well, it's been a busy summer so far. We had a Republican National Convention. We've had two state Democratic conventions, Republicans and, of course, our Democratic friends, and not to mention MLS soccer, and, of course, whatever else is on the minds of our political panel. Joining us today is Mark Rutherford, Libertarian, Jim Merritt, Republican, and former state representative and new to our program, and now I call her my favorite political pundit, Terri Austin. So, Mark, Terri, Jim, thank you all very much for being with us. So, Jim, let's go ahead and start with you. Let's talk about the Republican State Convention, which we saw as we record this program today. Unity, but also some issues in there. Donald Trump gave a heartfelt speech after his assassination attempt, I'd say for about 10, 15 minutes, but after that, he seemed to just go back into the old Trump Republican MAGA stuff.
Well, the RNC was highly entertaining, and I've been to many of those conventions through the years, and a lot of them were kind of snooze fests, and this was not that. And everything from the Gold Star families to Hulk Hogan, I think it was really a fun convention to watch on TV, and I'm certain that the folks that participated from Indiana really had a good time. When we did see the people from Indiana that were posting on Instagram and all sorts of social media, it really looked like there were a lot of smiles going on. And obviously, as you said, former President Trump finished it off last night with a humdinger, and now we're ready for the campaign. It's up to the Democrats of who we're going to run against, but it's never a dull moment with Donald Trump at the top of the ticket.
Terri, your thoughts on the Republican State Convention from both an entertainment value and a political value?
From the Republican State Convention?
No, the National Convention.
The National Convention. Well, I watched every evening and watched through almost every speech. And I will say, conventions are designed for the party base. They're designed to energize people. Oftentimes they promote new, promising, up-and-coming political or elected officials. We certainly saw some of that this last week. But it also should be about what is it that you want to accomplish for the country over the next 4 years if you're given the privilege of governing. And I think that there could have been more about policy, quite honestly, less about all the things the current administration they perceive as doing wrong, and talk to voters about what you're going to do to make their lives better. It cannot just be Donald Trump version 2. It's got to be about what you are actually going to do and how you're going to do it. You may end up with a split Congress. You may end up having total control. You may end up having no control over Congress. So we're just, that was my takeaway from all of this.
Mark, your thoughts on how the Republicans did this week?
Well, it was a typical convention. I think Jim highlights what goes on in a convention. It's for the base, in my opinion. It's for the people who are there. Most of the decisions are made beforehand. There's a long process before that in any convention. And then it's to try to get everybody at the convention to be happy and excited about who the candidate will be. Your description, Abdul, about Trump and his speech is accurate. It was pretty good from many standpoints, first 10, 15 minutes, and it kind of went into what he has been doing. So that was kind of disappointing, but not unexpected on that. But it was a fine convention when it comes to the Republican Party's delegates who were there and trying to make them happy and move forward. Terry's right. It'd been nice to hear a little bit more about what they're going to do and over the next 4 years. But these are staged. They've got plans. They've talked through it all. And this is what they produced. And they produced a fine convention when it comes to their base.
Jim, let me ask you. Obviously, Indiana played a very noticeable role in the state convention this year. You had Jim Banks, who had an opportunity to introduce J.D. Vance right next door in Ohio, the vice presidential candidate. Your thoughts on Jim Banks and Indiana's sort of prominent role in the state convention?
You're talking about the RNC.
RNC, yeah.
Yeah, the RNC. Indiana has played a role in so many conventions, and this one is exceedingly accessible for Hoosiers to be there because of our Anne Hathaway being in charge of the convention, and as well as Jim Banks is quite familiar, and Trump is familiar with him, and so we were ideally suited for playing a large role here. And I've been told that the first fundraiser for the vice presidential candidate J.D. Vance will be in Fort Wayne, the home, really Hartford City is, but the home of Jim Banks. And so Indiana did play a role up in Milwaukee, and it was really good to see Jim Banks there and playing, having a speech and playing a role there. And it really doesn't hurt that Anne Hathaway was running the whole party.
Terry, let me get your thoughts on this, because obviously you come from a different political perspective than Jim Banks and Anne Hathaway. But what were your thoughts on Indiana playing a prominent role? Is it still good for the state to have such Hoosiers, on that national stage?
I think it's a great opportunity anytime your home state is profiled or highlighted at either convention. It helps everything from whether people view Indiana as a place they might want to live or work. It's about making sure that the people who've worked hard to support their respective party get a chance to shine and also take in some of the proceedings and enjoy them. I do want to say, I want to give my hats off to Anne Hathaway. Anne is a friend, and I think she did an amazing job of organizing, executing, planning, and I'm assuming wrapping up this entire convention. I hope she's going to take a well-deserved break, at least for a few days, but she did a marvelous job.
Mark, let me get your thoughts before we move on to our next topic.
Well, it's always good to have Hoosiers involved in the political parties. And one thing I've observed over the years, and you study what has happened in the political parties, and this is the same holds true to the Libertarian Party at its convention. We often have way more people involved in very important positions in our conventions, in the parties, et cetera, than maybe our population would suggest. I don't know what it is. I've always said that we start learning how to do it in kindergarten is kind of a jest, but maybe we do. I don't know. And so it's nice to see, and it's very good that Hoosiers have always been interested, and usually in a very nice way, or as nice as can be, in the political parties. It's a good thing, and it's good for Hoosiers.
You're watching Indiana Issues. I'm your host, Abdul-Hakim Shabazz, the editor and publisher of IndyPolitics.org. Our guests on the program today are Libertarian Mark Rutherford, Republican Jim Merritt, and Democrat former State Representative Terri Austin. As we're looking at some of the big issues that have been facing the Hoosiers here in the state of Indiana. My friends, I want to change gears a little bit and talk about a couple more local conventions. We had the Republican convention recently where Micah Beckwith was named lieutenant governor candidate by the delegates. And also the Democrats had a convention too, sort of a two-contested race. Terry Gooden for lieutenant governor, Destiny Wells for attorney general. Terry, we'll start with you and the Democrats since they were the most recent ones. Your thoughts on how Democrats did recently with their nomination picks?
I think they did an excellent job, and neither selection was actually a surprise to me. I was thrilled to learn that we had over 1,900 delegates registered for our convention last Saturday. And it was a very enthusiastic, diverse crowd in terms of everything from demographics, age, race, ethnicity. It was what Indiana looks like. And I was particularly excited by the speeches that our ultimate gave. I thought Jennifer McCormick, why they slate them at the very end of a convention is beyond me, but she really spoke to the crowd and is connecting. I know she's connecting with voters. So I'm really excited about the next few months.
Mark, your thoughts on how the Democrats did?
I thought the Democrats did fine. If you take a side about, all our parties have different perspectives on some things, similarities on others. But it went through, they made a selection attorney general. In my opinion, they had two candidates with very good backgrounds to run as attorney general, and they had to make a decision, and they did. So, and so that's kind of nice to see that they have a couple of good people stepping forward on it. I don't know how that was in the behind the scenes and the upsetness that may have been there, because that makes a difficult decision. But a decision was made, and that was good. So I thought it was a fine convention, and I heard it was fairly well attended, and that's what the conventions are about for a political party. It's a good sign when a political party has a decent or better convention.
Jim, let me ask you, how do you think the loyal opposition did with their convention this past week? I'm sorry, a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, I think that the parties are going through, both parties are going through a leadership transition. Obviously, Randy Head is taken over for Ann Hathaway as chairman, and we're going to have a new governor and a new lieutenant governor. We're going to have a new U.S. senator in the Republican Party, and I believe. And I thought the Democrat convention was somewhat, following your tweeting, Abdul, was kind of entertaining, and both parties had some competition, and as well as some individuals that were that made you pay attention to the conventions themselves. And so it was not a whole, neither were a ho-hum affair. And frankly, with the Libertarians having the same governor candidate, it's kind of interesting. They have same governor candidate 2 elections in a row. That shows stability in that party. It's kind of interesting and intriguing. But bottom line is we have at the top of the ticket in coming November, we'll have the Republican Party will have all new people, and so will the Democrats. And so, they were transparent, and that's what the demand is these days. And so onward to the fall.
One interesting thing that happened at the Democratic State Convention, and Terry, I want to start with you on this one, which sort of surprised me as delegates and are sort of milling through the hallways, talking to vendors, and sort of taking a break before the event starts, was noticeably John Schmidt, who's a Republican candidate for Congress in the 7th Congressional District, which is for the most part the northern 2/3 of Indianapolis. John Schmidt was there. I'm like, is that John Schmidt? Like, John, what are you doing here? Like, this is a Democratic State Convention. Like, I'm helping out a friend. Like, who? It's like Bob Kern, the perennial candidate, Bob Kern. Like, what? First of all, you're a Republican at a Democratic convention. They're not going to listen to you, and you can't get in the room. And you got a candidate who's run for every office, since Jesus was alive. What was the reaction to all that? I got to know.
You know what, Abdul? You may be one of a handful of people who even realize that. I would say long live bipartisanship.
Okay, just double checking, because it just seemed really odd that a Republican would be, and it's not like it was a town hall meeting where different types of people that you can convince a voter. By the very nature that you're at a state convention, Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, that means you're a hardcore partisan. You believe in the values that your party's doing. So, like, dude, why are you here, Jim? Your thoughts since John Schmidt is a caucus candidate for Republicans in the 7th.
May I put my former Marion County Republican Party hat on for just a moment?
Yes, sir.
I think if I was in the position of county chairman, I would be infuriated, and as well as, and maybe you'll talk about this later. There was the yard sign in said candidate's yard, a Schmidt's yard sign in his neighborhood, in his front yard, and so. It's a mutual admiration society there. But for an individual who just was caucused in as a congressional candidate, I find this to be beyond the pale. And we're trying our hardest in Marion County to put together a campaign to run against Andre Carson, which is a very, very difficult mountain to climb, and my prediction is that will never. He will be in office as long as he wants to be in office, and so. But still, I find it reprehensible that somebody who and all the candidates from that caucus election have contacted me, and they're not happy about it, and so I'm disappointed, and it just I don't know how an explanation can be crafted as to why you would go support a Democrat.
Mark, let me get your thoughts in here on what John Schmidt did. Did it make any sense, or is it just something that's just sort of way out there?
Well, it's way out there and it doesn't make any sense, but it happens. And I tell people who are new to the process, they going to their first convention, that things like that can and sometimes do happen, and it happens to all the parties. So be prepared for it. Jim nailed it. When you take a position, especially as important as running for Congress and on the Republican ticket, you kind of, in my opinion, you have a duty to support that party. They supported you, and it's just, I'd be infuriated too. I wouldn't be if it was just somebody who occasionally shows up, maybe passes out stuff for a candidate every now and then. But if you're taking a position as you're basically saying I'm a leader of the party and I'm running for Congress in the 7th District as a Republican, you shouldn't be going to the Democratic convention unless it's to tell them that they're doing something that hurts you and you need to stop. And that's why he wasn't there. It looked like he was supporting Bob Kern. And Bob Kern, no matter what anybody thinks about him, he does this stuff. Sometimes he pops up at things. But you shouldn't have a Republican candidate for Congress at a Democratic convention. I don't know what was going on in his mind, and I understand why people are upset about it. It's all right to be very friendly with your opponents and talk with them and try to work things out if you need to. But going and supporting somebody from the different party is not the job that you took on and your responsibility.
You're listening to Indiana Issues and watching Indiana Issues. I'm your host, Abdul-Hakim Shabazz, the editor and publisher of IndyPolitics.org. Our guests on the program today are Libertarian Mark Rutherford, Democrat Terri Austin, and Republican Jim Merritt. We just talked about the Democrat State Convention. Now let's go ahead and start with the Republican State Convention. Not as much drama, but still as interesting. You had a contested race for Lieutenant Governor. You had Julie McGuire, who was sort of Mike Braun's sort of kind of nominee. But also you had Micah Beckwith, conservative pastor from Noblesville, who ran and actually won 51-49. Jim, what happened?
Well, Abdul, you've heard me say this probably countless times, but the situation with Julie, who was my intern in the early '90s in the state Senate, and I love her to death. It was really unfair to her, primarily because Micah Beckwith has been running for this office for 13 or 14 months and had an enormous head start. He put together a really good ground game in the way of contacting delegates or possible delegates in the last year. And I kind of compare it to a Indy 500 start versus an F1 start, where the Indy 500 you get a couple warm-up laps and then you go at the start of the race, versus F1 they all start from a standing start, and this was definitely an Indy 500 start where Micah had all the momentum and Julie was kind of thrown to the wolves and tried to make it around the state. There was no guarantee that the delegates that were selected in the primary would have access or would want access to her. And then once the Braun people saw that she needed some assistance after the first week or so, Senator Braun started going with her to these events. And that should have started in the beginning. Senator Braun should have been introducing her to the Republican Party because she'd only been in the House of Representatives for 2 years, and outstanding person and a great manager, and would have been a terrific lieutenant governor in my estimation. But and yet Micah had a head start and had made the relationships, and it was only 51-49, but a win is a win is a win. And Micah Beckwith will be a very good lieutenant governor. And he has farming in his background, and as part of being lieutenant governor and administrative responsibilities. But it really it was quite a convention this year, and Micah Beckwith won fair and square, and we move on.
Terry, let me ask you, now that Democrats have chosen Micah Beckwith as their candidate for lieutenant governor, does this make Julie McGuire and Terry Gooden's job easier, more difficult when we get to the general election?
Well, Micah Beckwith is the Republican nominee for lieutenant governor. Let's get that straight. Not the Democrat nominee. I don't know. Let me say this. Micah Beckwith and the team that worked with him did exactly what they needed to do prior to the convention ever taking place. They went out and recruited delegates. They got delegates to run, and delegates who were pledged to him at least through the first or second ballot. And so that's what happened in the convention 2 years ago. Those delegates were there for a purpose and a reason. And delegates, like all Hoosier voters, like to be courted for their vote and asked for their vote. Julie McGuire did not have much time to try to play catch up. And I'm going to agree with Jim. Mike Braun should have been taking her around, as should have many other popular Republican elected officials, to introduce her to as many of those delegates as possible. And you see what happens with the outcome when you don't think enough. When you start thinking in January and February, about who your delegates are going to be, that is critical when you get to the point of who your nominees are going to be.
Mark, let me get your thoughts on sort of the interesting events at the Democrat state convention, at the Republican state convention, I mean.
Well, the most interesting thing was the Beckwith McGuire race, and that shows a problem that maybe there may not, depends on what you want. Is the lieutenant governor just a standalone position with lots of power? I mean, the legislature has given the lieutenant governor a lot of responsibilities and power. Or do you want to have a team of the governor and lieutenant governor? And I can argue both ways, the good, the pros, and the cons of either having it as a team or having it like the attorney general. The attorney general may be of the same party as the governor, but they do have really separate types of things to do. And so there might be some conflict there, and everybody goes, well, that's going to happen occasionally. But when it comes to governor, lieutenant governor, is that what you really want? You got to give Micah Beckwith, he worked hard and did what needed to be done and was able to get a victory out of it. And he had a head start. The problem for the Republicans was they had a pretty good race when several decent candidates, and it wasn't clear who's going to win that primary. And then you've got 2 months to try to get the lieutenant governor candidate all squared away. So where do you put your priorities? Do you start introducing somebody before the primary? And I think Braun was just a little too late in really pushing his candidate. That would have helped a lot more. It was a very close race, but Beckwith had the head start and had worked really hard on it. The biggest problem is I see between Braun and from Beckwith some major differences on priorities. And so is that going to cause some problems that may be solved if they were two very independent offices and not this idea that they're somehow associated with each other?
I'm going to call it audible. I didn't put this on our topic list, but you guys are all smart, and I've asked you all this question before. Is it time for Indiana to change the way it elects its lieutenant governor and attorney general, for that matter? Because on the one hand, with the governor, you got the governor in the primary, but you got the lieutenant governor at a state convention. Wouldn't it make more sense to run them both together as a team in a primary, or at least put them both in the primary, or both in a convention? Me personally, I'd rather have this all done in a convention because the primary is paid for by taxpayers and a whole bunch of crap that goes along with that. Jim, we'll start with you.
Well, Abdul, you've heard me say over and over in the last year or so, I've really changed my mind about primaries. And of course, I come from Marion County. And of course, when I was chairman and prior to my being chairman of the party, we had slating. And so we slated. So we were trying to save money, and thus the primary would be just a perfunctory situation with nominating an individual. But I think way back in 1980, when John Mutz was running for lieutenant governor, the Speaker of the House, Kermit Burrows, was running. A guy by the name of Vandana from Shelbyville, who was the head of the B&V, was running. There were probably 5 or 6 lieutenant governor candidates who were running in the primary to be Bob Orr's partner and running in the 1980 campaign. And John Mutz prevailed and won that race. Now, we changed that because there was so much money that was raised with all those candidates into this other situation where the lieutenant governor was nominated at the convention. And I think that's a good I think what we have right now with the lieutenant governor, I think that is the proper way. But I said this on State House happenings a lot of times that Braun or any of the other fine candidates the Republican Party had running for governor, if I were running, I would have named my lieutenant governor probably in September. Indiana has 92 counties. It's a long state. There are 6.8 million people there, and you can divide and conquer, if you will. And I would have named my lieutenant governor early on just to show and to have a teammate. And so I think that would have been the best situation, especially if Micah Beckwith really coming down the tracks, steaming along, that a Suzanne Crouch or anybody else could have been ready for a convention fight. And so I think if I would recommend change to future candidates is name your lieutenant governor candidate early and have a team going forward.
Terri, we got just a couple minutes left here, so I'll give you a chance to respond, then go to Mark Rutherford.
Okay, thanks. Well, I'm gonna look at this differently than Jim does. I think you could see exactly what happened at the Republican Party. You could have someone who has one platform and philosophy approach. And then if you have a primary where you've got multiple candidates, can you imagine what it might have been like this last spring? In addition to the 7 Republican gubernatorial candidates, you had 7 different lieutenant governor candidates as well. And it would have been a free-for-all. Suzanne Crouch did name her lieutenant governor early, and unfortunately didn't help her get over the finish line. And maybe she picked the wrong horse. I don't know, but it didn't. I mean, it was certainly, by many accounts, a competitive Republican primary. But in the end, you end up with a forced marriage. And I don't know that that's necessarily good for the party or for the candidates themselves.
Actually, some of us would say shotgun marriage, but I see your point. Mark, I'll give you the last word, my friend.
Yes.
And by the way, the Libertarian friends do all their things at state conventions. They don't do primaries. I want to make that perfectly clear to our audience who's listening.
And that's by state law. I mean, I come from the position that I prefer the convention system for everybody. I also prefer that the government doesn't fund it in any way whatsoever. The general elections are a different thing, but the primary should be up to the political parties, and the government should make it fairly easy for political parties to nominate people. So there's no problem with having 4 or 5 people out there. It doesn't have to be just 2 or 3, like in Indiana's been 3 since '94. And occasionally you'll get somebody else on there. So if a political party wants primaries, they want to pay for it. I'm fine with that. But I think that the convention system just works better. There's no perfect system. And that's kind of the way we need to go. And then the decision needs to be, if we're calling it lieutenant governor and the lieutenant governor then takes over for the governor, if they become ill or dies or something else happens to them, like they retire, that seems like it should be more of a team. But if they want to change lieutenant governor to the head of the farming industry in Indiana or whatever it is that they want to do, then that gives it a different viewpoint, a different stage, and that may be more appropriate for the current system. where that person should be in the primaries too, if the governor is. So I would like to go to easier ballot access. The political parties choose primaries or not, they pay for it if they want the primary. Libertarians, we pay for our own conventions fully. And that we don't have this lack of clarity on, is it a team or is it two different separate office holders that occasionally are going to disagree?
All right, we'll have to leave it there for right now. Our guests on the program today have been Libertarian Mark Rutherford, Democrat Terri Austin, and Republican Jim Merritt. Special thanks to all the good folks here at Site Strategics and Edge Media Studios for putting up with us today. Always good to be back, folks. Always good to be back. You've been watching Indiana Issues. I'm Abdul-Hakim Shabazz. We'll talk to you next time on Indiana Issues.